Fighting the war on terror has been a frustrating ordeal with mixed results. It's been kind of like whack-a-mole. A situation might be diffused in one part of the world, but then a homemade bomb pops up in another. We got a reminder of how this happens earlier this month when a device similar to the ones detonated along the Boston Marathon route went off in New York City. The suspect, Ahmad Khan Rahami, was reportedly inspired by, quote, brother Osama bin Laden. In Minnesota, Dahir Ahmed Adan went on a stabbing rampage at a suburban mall that same weekend, injuring 9 shoppers. A news agency linked to the Islamic State claimed Adan was a soldier in their war on the West.
The attacker himself did ask some of the people if they were Muslim before they were attacked.
After these attacks, President Obama acknowledged concerns about how young people here are being radicalized.
We will continue to lead the global coalition in the fight to destroy ISIL, which is instigating a lot of people over the internet to carry out attacks.
So how can we fight the so-called lone wolves carrying out these attacks? Well, here's a radical thought. Talk to someone who knows how to recruit jihadists. Joining me now is Jesse Morton, who actually did just that from his website, Revolution Muslim. He's now a fellow at George Washington University's program on extremism. Jesse, it's good to meet you. Thank you for being here. What attracted you initially to this sickness, to jihad, to al-Qaeda? What was the lure?
I mean, they have a comprehensive narrative that's incredibly appealing
like what?
And alluring. They have a comprehensive worldview that promotes this idea of a utopic establishment of an Islamic State that is going to tear down the order as it exists now and rebuild something in their own image. For one that identifies with Islam, it can be quite attractive.
So was it that attracted you, or was it the contempt for what is here? That it was a combination of both?
I think it's both. Wherever you find radicalization, I think that what you find is disgruntled individuals, people that are humiliated or some different circumstance in their background that makes them open to a new worldview, and they offer a new paradigm.
So you're young, you do a little prison time for unrelated stuff, narcotic stuff. You end up at Columbia University, I guess the jail to Columbia pipeline. While you're doing this, you found this website, Revolution Muslim, that essentially, and it's the first of its kind, is it not? The goal is to recruit people for al-Qaeda, to encourage people to become lone wolves, yes?
Well, essentially at the time, al-Qaeda was promoting the narrative that because they were no longer a hierarchical organization, due to efforts of the global war on terror, that everyone everywhere had to promote the message. We adopted that call, and we inserted al-Qaeda's narrative, I could honestly say for the first time in the post-9/11 era, into the United States. And it had a pretty detrimental effect.
What do you mean detrimental effect?
We were connected to, at the time, leaderless lone wolf attacks were something that we were starting to recognize as a growing threat, but we hadn't yet quite realized it. Within 2 years of starting Revolution Muslim, we were starting to see more and more convictions. We were starting to see more and more efforts to attack by people that were raised and grown in the West. And ultimately, Revolution Muslim was connected to about 50% of the terror-related cases in the United States during the period of 2009, 2010.
What level of guilt, if any, do you feel for this? You also linked to Inspire magazine, Al-Qaeda's magazine, with how to make a bomb in your mom. How to make a bomb in the basement of your mom, which the Tsarnaevs allegedly looked at. Do you feel crushing guilt? Or?
Well, the particular case of the Tsarnaevs was particularly troubling because when the attorney on my case sentenced me, he said that someday the propaganda that we espoused was going to lead to deaths in the United States. And it wasn't until a few years later that I had to witness that firsthand. And so every day I walk around with a tremendous amount of guilt when I reflect upon who I once was. When I watch old videos, when I think about what we propagated, it essentially sickens me.
Do you feel responsible for some of these deaths?
Not directly responsible, but I think that there is a serious connection between ideas and action that I have to take accountability for.
So you got no legal trouble until ultimately one of your partners, one of your associates, published the addresses of some of the writers of South Park when they were mocking Muhammad. You ultimately pled guilty, to conspiring to solicit murder, some such thing, flee to Morocco. Mm-hmm. And then the story, I have to say, the first part of the story that I find a little hard to believe is, at least as you're telling it through places like the New York Times and elsewhere, is what began to turn you around was the kindness of strangers. An FBI agent who gave you back the Quran, which had been taken away from you, a prison guard when you ultimately went to jail for I know you were sentenced to more, but went to jail for 3.5 years. These small kindnesses are what began to crack your mind open?
De-radicalization, just like radicalization, is a process. It's not an event. My initial move to Morocco led me into contact with people that I believed were more supportive of the establishment of the Islamic State than I once imagined. So that started a pre-contemplative state of reflection. The propaganda of Al-Qaeda started to make a little bit less sense as time went on. And then, yes, it's true, not the sole primary part of my de-radicalization, but in eradicating that black and white worldview, being treated like a human being was effective by numerous people.
You became an informant for the FBI. Are you still doing that for the FBI?
I am still contributing to governmental understandings, but through the program on extremism at GW.
At GW. When Washington Post outed you as an informant, they were the first, were they not?
Yes.
Did you not feel at risk? I mean, was your safety, at least your personal safety, your family, your personal safety, not a concern to you?
Well, that was the idea of the defense attorney, was essentially to threaten in case I had to ultimately take the stand. He was an activist, and he was set there to do just that. My name was struck from the record, and he proceeded with the story. And yes, he put me in serious risk, and it's something that I still...
Do you feel at risk here? I don't mean in the studio, but today, now? And if you don't, why don't
not
you?
Not a significant amount of risk,
Why not?
because mechanisms have been put in place to make sure that that's not the case.
Are we at risk? I mean, how do we know that you're the real deal? I mean, you used to be a different kind of real deal. You've theoretically had a conversion. Obviously, the faculty at GW buys it. Obviously, our government buys it. But I'm sure some people, including the victims and some of the people you inspired, don't. Why do we believe that the you who you say you are today is who you really are?
Well, first and foremost, I understand that I've been undergoing this process for several years, so I know where I'm at. But I totally understand where some people could be critical and skeptical, and the only thing that I can do is try to prove myself over time. I mean, I think that will become evident if I can contribute to the conversation as it unfolds.
How do you contribute to the I mean, what do you say to the young person, either watching or out there, who is interested in buying what you used to sell? What do you do to convince him or her that that's not the purchase they want to make?
Well, there's an array of ways that you can intervene, and that's a long discussion. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to challenge the worldview. And I think it starts with the ideology. And I think that that's one of the most effective means I can give into this ambit, is being able to counter exactly the ideology that is espoused. And we have to realize that it's primarily young people that adopt it. And when young people are going through the identity search that we all undergo when we're young, it's quite common for us to attach ourselves to alternative perspectives. I simply would ask them to reflect and try to be as rational as possible and to look through the fact that a lot of times ideologues and people with their own agendas try to manipulate you and to think rationally about what's being espoused. Even
if people like you and government efforts can convince some who might do what you did when you were younger not to do it, we've heard from experts saying lone wolves are the greatest threat to this country, not these huge things. FBI Director Comey's in front of Congress the other day, says the good news is we're essentially beating them over there. The bad news is that's creating a greater risk here. Can we can stop individuals. This lone wolf movement, for lack of a better expression, there's no way we can stop that, is there?
Well, it's a little bit of a misnomer, the lone
How so?
wolf. They usually don't hunt alone, they hunt in packs. And what we do see is that there's oftentimes connections with radical hubs over the internet and social media that we can't identify.
Could Omar Mateen have been stopped in Orlando? Could Rahimi have been stopped in Jersey?
There was leakage in Omar Mateen's situation. A relative contacted the FBI and told them that he was radicalizing and listening to Anwar al-Awlaki videos. We also have indicators from the New Jersey situation, the Rahimi case. And so when we look in retrospect, hindsight is 20/20, but we can continue to learn about the identifying indicators, and I think we can develop better assessment tools with regard to discovering where a person lies on a spectrum between radicalization and violent extremism in the realm of ideology. So we're making prospect.
I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Jesse Morton.